Okay, we're recording anyway.
Cool.
Who's doing the intro? It's your podcast.
I'll do the intro, I guess. I haven't had all the glam and flashiness on my podcast lately, so let's fucking get right into it. Gentlemen, how you doing?
We're good.
What's
How are
up?
you?
Doing well. Um, so last week got a notification on my phone. I open it up and there's a title to the chat box, "The Fellowship of the Range." My heart jumped in my throat, and I was like, "We're back."
We're back, baby. We're back.
Back. It's been a while. How you guys doing?
I know. I don't know. I feel like a bit like Gandalf, and the other stuff is like something dark is stirring, and
Yeah,
we're being forced
Mordor's
into
come to
action.
life.
Yeah,
I think what was that like the Two Towers? Gandalf the White comes back.
Gandalf. Yeah,
Was it that one? He comes back and he
yeah. It comes
saves
back at the
everyone.
start of it. Yeah, Gandalf the White.
The big light
Gandalf.
shining through. Who is it?
Gandalf. They called me.
It's the wizard. We're back.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's
How's things going in infinite lockdown?
we're actually opened up pretty good over here. Kind of back to normal. Are you still locked down over there?
We're still, yeah, still pretty fucking tough until they roll out a vaccine. It's actually fine for me. I've moved house into the countryside, so I'm like just hang out with my animals now, and that's fine. But yeah, oh, Jesus, I see. Jeff's got a cool background.
Yeah, I'm in the Falcon.
Yeah, so
I'm
people
gonna
listen
come.
to this.
I'm about to
If you
come
want to
blow your
watch
Death
us
Star up.
talking, we're recording this to go onto the old YouTube or onto my YouTube later. I'm sure everyone else will bang it up to their ones.
Yeah.
But yeah, you can look at our pretty faces.
So yeah,
So
we were chatting and like one thing I guess we haven't really focused on is really getting deeper into static stretching. Just I mean it's always
yeah,
a flexibility talk, getting into that stuff, and we were making we had good momentum. It seemed like last in the summer there. Um, we're just getting out, and it's it's still so much better than it was, and but there's still just that uh, still that like lash against stretching. Like it's still basically anything but stretching is what you need to do. There's still that message being preached,
yeah,
and yeah, I thought it'd be good for us like get on and
yeah.
preach the good word, the fellowship.
Preach the good word of the static stretching, combat the evil
Yeah,
empire. I say this while like I'm sitting on the Death Star throne room, but yeah, I think it's really interesting. I was really thinking about this lately. I've been doing a lot of thinking, and I'm putting some stuff on hold and going to redesign what I'm doing. But one of the things I was really thinking about was like I've been I've been training for quite a long time, but I've been using the internet to research training topics for about 20 years now. Let's just talk about that. Just doing that. And what I've realized is the same arguments that were going on 20 years ago are still present today, and people just keep recycling them. And
yeah,
we can see it. How deep should I squat? Is squatting ass to grass dangerous? Is how much strength do you need? Do you need double bodyweight squat before doing plyometrics? Is core important? Is core training unimportant? Static stretching doesn't work. Well, that's kind of one of everyone says static stretching doesn't work. And this is one of those things where, like, if you went to a dance school of good repute, a gymnastics school of good repute, a martial arts school of good repute, or even a yoga school of good repute and told them, do you know the static stretching you're engaging in doesn't work? Everyone would laugh at you. Everyone would just basically laugh and just go, what are you talking about? It clearly
yeah,
works if it's well designed. I think a lot of what it comes down to is the people who are, once again, it's my normal argument, the people who are implementing static stretching in their programs don't know what they're doing. They
yeah,
don't understand the exercises. They don't understand what they're looking at. It's badly taught. If you look at your generic strength and conditioning program, obviously not our listeners here who are doing better, you would have some kind of warm up activation block, preparation for the exercises. You'd have your main kind of exercise, your secondary main exercise, and then some accessories And we'd pick those accessories based on this person has weak calves, so we will do something for their calves, as an example. And we aim to go, oh, this is a hole in their conditioning. We're aiming to bring this up. Or this person needs more hypertrophy in this muscle group because of the demands. Like a wrestler, okay, they need a bigger neck just to, whatever. And this is all accessible. But then at the end, it's like, stretch your hamstrings. How? I don't know, touch your toes. And it's just like, it comes back to, there's just a lack of precision. There's a lack of precision on how the exercises are done, the condition the exercises are done in. What is the expectation of the performance of the exercise? Once again, we notice for hypertrophy or strength training, it's like, oh, we want to build up a big amount of strength. Well, we're going to try and move that weight fast. Oh, we want hypertrophy. Maybe we're going to focus on a bit slower contraction, but really mentally get into it and really squeeze the shit out of what we're doing.
Yeah.
And if you ask strength coaches this, they're all going to basically agree, and there'll be a bit of trends on the top, but they know where we're coming from. Where stretching is just like, oh yeah, my back is sore. Do a wall quad stretch. Oh, how do we set it up? What's the difference between wearing, what sort of underwear is going to affect your stretch? This is important. And all this kind of thing is just like, I'm just using this as an outlier, but it is an example of like, there's just not the knowledge and there's not the practical experience. And then when we go to the research where people are like, oh, static stretching doesn't work, or compared to full range training, they're equally efficient, or full range training is better, or whatever. But then you look at the studies and you look at the people doing it and people going, and they basically go, we've taken some people who've never tried to improve their range, and we've given them exercise to improve the range, and they both improve their range. Therefore, this is better, or this one's slightly better. And, you're not looking at magnitude of effect, you're just looking at statistical significance. And it's just like, well, it's one of those things. It's like, say, taking someone who's unfit, and we're going to go, oh, you've never done cardiovascular training before. We're going to give one group 200-meter sprints at about 75% intensity, and the other group, we're going to give them a 5K run at whatever intensity. And we're going to test both of them. And lo and behold, both of them improve in basically all measures of cardiovascular fitness. Mm-hmm. Where it's the same thing in like kind of range development training. It's like, oh, we compared static stretching with this. And then it's like, I'm going to rant a bit about papers actually, because I'm going through a few. It's like using the controls on a lot of the papers done for this are bad. They are not done. If we look at, like, I have a key for dismissing most papers. If it doesn't mention the time of day that they measured the stretching and the hydration status of the people doing it, you can basically dismiss the paper immediately. If it doesn't track menstrual cycle for women, you can distract it immediately, unless you can kind of figure it out yourself. But it's these kind of things are like very clear biochemical things that we know affect range of motion and the fluctuation of range of motion over a month, or over your hydration status, or over your circadian rhythm. So it's like, if I wanted to prove that squatting made me gain more range of my hamstrings than stretching, I'd just test the squat people in the morning for their first thing, and then in the afternoon for their next group, and go, lo and behold, look, they gained range, and then just retest the hamstring people in the morning. And this shit does happen. So, I don't want to get too conspiracy on it, but I do know this kind of shit happens to try and improve stuff.
Yeah.
And then it's like hydration status, obviously a clear one. So it's kind of, this is a rant against research and just how badly constructed a lot of this stuff is as well.
Yeah.
But I think back to the static stretching, it's like, to say it doesn't work shows you don't really know how to implement it properly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. I'm big on my own experiences as well. And going on the journey, it was probably the number one thing that stood out was that I had never actually stretched before.
Yeah.
And if people are going to come to me at the stage I'm at now and inquire about these things, then I'm going to tell them exactly what I did and what worked for me and what worked for everybody that I have been helping. And it all starts with learning how to stretch properly, how to be in a static stretch. Not to overcomplicate it to a point where you're wondering about the pails and the rails and the, whatever contraction has to happen, but just learning to be and learning to actually hold the stretch. That is the foundation of starting a sound flexibility routine, is actually learning that one component. And it seems to be the only thing that people are trying to get around is like, what can I do besides that? because I don't like that.
I think,
um,
yeah, to talk over you. I think Kit Lachlan nailed it in one of the workshops. He came to Berlin. We organized, or helped him organize one, and he was just basically people were doing a hip flexor stretch or piriformis, can't remember, some kind of stretch, and he just went around, look around the room at the people stretching. Look, everyone's kind of wiggling around on the stretch, and if you're wiggling around on the stretch, you're basically trying to avoid the stretch. You're not actually going. So in a static stretch, you must be static to a certain degree once you've set your position.
Yeah.
And this is where the question of what the phrase, I don't really like it, stretch tolerance comes in. Of like, can you actually tolerate the stretch? Well, you have to be able to modulate the intensity that you can survive for your durational, whatever duration you're looking to hold it for. But it is that kind of thing of like, oh, yeah, can you survive it? Or are you wiggling around? Are you being actually static? And, I have my own arguments against the term passive as well, but that's a different conversation. But are you being static? Is it actually true static stretching? Or are you kind of flossing yourself a little?
mhm. Yeah, 100%. We had an interesting group we took through, like I took through the teacher training recently, took a group through that, and those first 4 weeks were just about static stretching and experimenting with being in the stretch in different ways. It wasn't about like hold the stretch for 90 seconds. It was like, okay, what happens when we get into the stretch and we contract right away? What happens when we stay in the stretch and we hold and then we contract later on in the stretch? And again, it's the findings that are so interesting is that it's all completely individualized.
Yeah.
Half of the group preferred contracting right away, and they had maybe more of a background in athletics and strength base, I guess you could say, where the other half preferred being in the stretch and then contracting as they settled into the stretch. So it was, again, interesting to see among the group that there wasn't just one set way to static stretch. It was, present ideas and learn what works for the individual within the stretch.
Yeah. I think that comes too with like experience. And obviously, if you want to call it tolerance to the stretch, once you kind of learn how to manage it a little better and predict it, I think is like, it's funny because when I started teaching stretching on a big scale, people definitely resist it. Like they want to kind of fight back against it, or like Emmet was talking about, they want to avoid it and move around and kind of just do everything but just stay there and hold it. And it's always one of the arguments like, oh, you could do multiple sets of 30 seconds or 90 seconds, or what about 5 minutes or whatever. And I'll just bring up an example is that I was actually talking with when we were kind of posting all this stuff on Instagram about people saying static stretching doesn't work, or it's not time efficient, or all these different things. A member, someone that we've actually both kind of coached when we were on the Range of Strength lives on the Sundays, and he said that he actually had one of the biggest epiphanies doing one of those classes, because he had tried variations of flexibility training before. And, there's many different schools now at this point teaching different things and whatever. And he was one of those who didn't really think that static passive stretching worked. But what happened during the class was I think I was running it and I was probably talking, so I lost track of time. And so we ran into the stretch like for a significant amount of time. It was probably like about 5 minutes or so. But he said that specific time he had the breakthrough, because he said he finally actually managed to reach the point where he felt like he actually relaxed and kind of embraced the range and the flexibility and the static stretch. And it took him 5 minutes. Like some people are so resistant to it. And that's like one of the things that I've learned is, when you tell somebody 2 or 3 minutes, their eyes pop open and they're like, holy crap, that's a long time. But initially it does take that long for people to get comfortable. Mm-hmm. So when, these guys try 15 seconds or 30 seconds or whatever, it's like, you're not even scratching the surface. You're not even breaking the surface here. You spent no significant amount of time in a stretch where of course you're not really going to get, especially initially. Like, again, once you get more experienced, it's like, I know I can get into a stretch for 30 seconds and boom, get down into it and get everything I need out of it. But I did not start like that. I was one of those where I needed 5 minutes in a pancake stretch to really relax and ease into it and get to the point where I could just lay there and be still. And it's like, that's what you see a lot with these high end, elite dancers and gymnasts. Like, how long did you stay in that stretch? Like, oh, I was in a pancake for 10 minutes. Like, is that necessary? Not, again, the context is important, who you're dealing with. And there's so many factors that's going to determine whether that's going to be the most efficient for that person or not. But that's the issue, more or less, is them making these massive, big claims that, like, it's super time efficient if you're not spending enough time in it to get anything out of it. Of course it is, but it's up to you as a coach to determine what that's going to take. And from my experience, especially coaching people that are getting introduced to true stretching and flexibility training, it takes a lot longer time, just from my experience, than people give credit to.
Definitely.
So
it's always this kind of thing of like, it's doing a stretch it's like peeling an onion layer by layer. You get into stretch. If we just look at the sensations that come up, it's like you begin to swim in the sea of sensations that your body is going. And most people just get into the position. This is one of the key things for me with static stretching, is the exploration of the body and how the exploration of your own patterns of tension. And this kind of, it's very, how to describe it? It's very interesting, basically. So everything's interesting for me, but it's always this thing of like, you go into a position, and then there's an initial tension reaction to that position. And then you'll sink a bit deeper. But then there's all these other sensations you can start noticing. You can start like looking, it's like, say I'm doing a bilateral stretch, I'm doing a pancake stretch. Is the sensation the same either side? And I mean, like, is it really the same? Or is like one leg you feel it more in the adductor magnus, the other one you feel it more in the hip. One hip flexor is pulling harder. One point is lighting up in one leg, and one you have a full length stretching sensation of the whole muscle. All these kind of things are things you can begin to notice. And the thing is, like, the initial tension pattern reaction you get, if you scan the body and hold your intent on it without commenting, without judging, or without getting involved in what's going on, just observe it, you begin to see that it disappears. It doesn't, like, this is weird, it doesn't exist. You can just get into the tension, the initial one, and that goes away. That's like it's almost a projection of what sensation your body thinks you should feel. Once that goes away, then obviously maybe you'll go deeper or not. But then the true sensations and what's going on really, really begin to show themselves. And this is like when people are talking about, oh, I learned to relax. It's like, oh, I was in the position and there's kind of this movement towards the center of the body from the limbs, and that kind of is holding. And it's the moment when you can just like lengthen and expand out. It doesn't even mean you go deeper, but there's a moment when the body gives up the fighting tension and kind of transfers it. It feels like it takes the tension from the muscles that are resisting the stretch and lets them relax into the connective tissue and the parallel elastic components.
Yep.
And then that's when we're beginning to get somewhere.
Yeah, and then we can start laying down tissue. We can start actually creating change. And that for me was like I don't even know. It was probably 6 to 8 months of just learning to get over resisting that. Because you're resisting it the whole time because you don't want to do it, and it's uncomfortable, and you don't have that locus of attention that Kit talks about. You don't have that focus, that like meditative mindset. Like you just want to not be in it. You're looking, you're looking for an easier way. Man, I mean, that relates to anything. Like it's, you want to get strong in your squat, you're going to do uncomfortable things. And it's a big part of making that progress on the barbell is getting over the resistive. Well, it hurts my hands. Well, my neck hurts. It's like, yeah, you're trying to lift heavy weight. It's kind of, it's the exact same.
Yeah, there's a lot of parallels people don't respect, right? It's like, it's why we can often make the comparison to strength training, because like, the guiding principles of excelling in both are this exact same. But people think that it's like stretching is this like frou-frou experience where it's like it's going to be soft and easy, and it's like, no, dude. Like I've had full grown men with making millions of dollars playing sports sweat more bullets stretching than them actually training, like strength training. You know what I mean? It's like that's the kind of intensity it takes to improve and kind of confront those things. And like I tell people a lot, because a lot of people ask me kind of how I got started in flexibility, and for me it was like I was trying to find a solution that foam rollers and things weren't giving me, right? And I just had, from baseball, just had so many jacked up. I didn't even realize it until I really started stretching. Just the significance from side to side, and it was more about handling an issue. And once you really, for real, experience stretching, you like anyone who's actually done it knows it works, and it works well. Like I've never had a person,
regardless if they want to admit it, like, you know what I mean? You know what? Like, you can say whatever you want, but I know damn well if you got this certain type of range, you spent a significant amount of time stretching at the beginning.
Yeah.
Don't fucking lie to me, because I've been there.
Yeah, it's a lot. I mean, and I made the evolution of like to some more of the extreme stuff, like being crazy enough to do Emmet's head to toe,
Mm-hmm.
and a funny story about that is I experienced the same thing he talked about just with static stretching. And I initially, looking back, it was like, I think I even remember asking Emmet, like, why 3 by 72? Like, what's the significance there? And he's like, there's no fucking significance. Just fucking do it. Right. I was like, all right. But I did it. I mean, I'm sure there was, but it was more or less of a, like, you don't need to know really what this, like, the significance probably really doesn't matter. Just do the routine. Like, that's what matters. Right. And like, okay. But of course I did it all out. Right. Like, there was the optional 36 reps in the morning. That was like the optional thing, but I was like, no, fuck that. Like, I'm going to do the 36 reps in the morning. And it was brutal. But what I realized is what took me by the third set to finally really relax and ease into the pulses and get comfortable over the weeks and the months, it became, it took 12 reps of each side versus like, 200 something reps on one side. Like that ability to access it more quickly came over time as, the stretch tolerance in a way, as I became more acclimated to it, definitely as tissue laid down. I've never had hamstring DOMs and like glute DOMs the way I had calf, the way I had that. But it's the same experience, even outside of static passive stretching, even with dynamic stretching or ballistic stretching or whatever. It was that same kind of, it took time to access it faster and quicker.
Mm-hmm.
And, and then however far you want to take it's another story, but it took a lot of volume initially to just like,
and it's the parallel is the same in strength training. Those athletes you were training and sweating their ass off, I guarantee you they were doing that the first time they started doing their strength work too, right? They just forget, right?
Yeah.
And it's easy to forget when you become flexible too, because I've forgotten this year. There's been moments where I've forgotten about all that work because it's like accessible to me. It's like, what was it, last summer we did the head to toe thing, and it came back in like a couple of weeks. I was like, oh yeah, it's still there. So it's like, but you forget, right? And I think it's the same. Yeah, when you get to that higher level of conditioning, not elite sports maybe, but just like, you're a runner and you can run an easy 5K. Well, it didn't start like that. And you forget, right? Like you forget, like all that time you spent stretching and hating every second of it, and then where you're at now. Like that's, I think, what you always have to put into perspective.
Yeah, it's definitely you just kind of reminded me of something there. So going back to good friend Kit Lachlan as normal. So Kit starts his workshops with what he considers the most important thing first, which is stretching hip flexors properly. And as you guys are aware, Kit can talk. He is the master of talking in terms of entertaining, captivating, always thing. He's always explaining stuff. And there is a point to, I'll explain it anyway for people who go to his workshop at some point, but he's talking to try and teach you to understand the stretch. So he's kind of distracting you a little, but he puts you in a hip flexor stretch. and there's someone sitting on you, and you're propped up, and it's the stretch therapy thing. You've done a couple of rounds of contractions, and then he just starts talking at you. And suddenly you kind of realize you've probably been in a stretch about 5 minutes of hip flexors. Now, part of his reason for it is that like people should need to learn to tap out and take control and autonomy of their own stretching and go, okay, when I've had enough. But the other point is just like he kind of knows that people won't tap out because he hasn't told them when to go. He's given them instructions saying, basically you do your stretch and then do 10 breaths paying attention. But, most people have gone well beyond the 10 breaths, but they're not tapped out. And slowly around that, like, room, this is when you start to see people, like, sweat breaking down, like, big jack dudes or yoga teachers or whoever's at the workshop and all this shit. Just from, like, it is partner stretching, but it still is static stretching. And it's still just, like, this was like when you start seeing the weird emotional reactions and stuff coming up to this that you just don't really get in strength training.
Yeah.
And it's interesting. Like the first time you kind of done one of these like 5 or 6 minute hip flexor stretches, like a lot of shit comes out. But then like the next few times you do it, you kind of know, but then it can be there's a recoil response afterwards towards the thing. You can tighten up, obviously, just like you do in strength training. Get DOMs, recovery period, then you output the new range, but you also output the new experience and control quite quickly. That it's like the first time it's a shock to the system. It's kind of like your first time doing a 20 rep squat. Like you guys have obviously done the 20 rep squat routine. Like for a lot of people, the first time doing the 20 reps squat is like, oh, you're outside with a bucket or you're running to the car park, whatever. First time on air down for me was like that. It was like, oh, this thing looks like fun. Go for it and just go as fast as I can. 30 seconds. Like I don't feel too good. I have to run. And it's that kind of experience, but it's it's not lactate building up. It's something different.
Yeah.
And that's what's kind of interesting is until you've really had that experience and gone through a couple of releases and a couple of like what you think is going on, then it becomes a skill you can access. But until you've done it and had the experience, like anything in life, really, you're just kind of making it up as you go along.
Yeah.
I had that experience doing your head to toe routine. I wanted to vomit a few times. I was like, oh my God, I got so uneasy. And it is, I think, definitely a more emotional response than it is like an actual physical one. Obviously that too, but it is an interesting note that like there is a lot of emotions tied to these different things. And of course you could get down the rabbit hole of how flexibility, Kit talks about it a lot, about how flexibility is an imprint of different traumas and different things you've experienced in your life and things like this. And you do start to visit places while you're stretching and you're just like, wow, it is an interesting experience because I don't think I've ever, I train, I have to say I train my ass off. I train pretty hard and I don't ever reach a place like that when I'm training. I definitely get uncomfortable, but I don't get to a place where I'm like reassessing my whole life path and how I got to where I was and all these things that you definitely do with stretching. It's, I don't know. I think maybe some guys just can't confront it. They're just weak.
There's definitely, there's definitely one of these things that it is like, I think for me, if we're just going to go into a bit more esoteric stuff, it is like when you put yourself into a static position, this is why isometric training isn't too popular, just like normal strength isometrics as well. You're putting yourself into a confrontation with yourself, your perceived self, and what's actually going on in reality. And this is why, like, just normal isometrics, say I'm pushing against like some pins or something for bench or squat or whatever. People just like, even though it's very effective, we notice it's one of the best ways of dealing with sticking points and rate of force development. No one really wants to train it after they've done it for a while, even though it doesn't, because it's like you're just going, this is me in confrontation with the world, and it's just not working. It's very frustrating. And it's the same with stretching. It's like, oh, I have a shape to my body, just like I have a shape to the mind. And now I'm just pulling that shape to its limit and showing maybe you could go beyond what you think is in there or what your perception of yourself is in there. And it can be very frustrating for a lot of people. There is kind of if we're to go into Chinese medicine terms, we're going a bit deeper. So we're speaking in abstract concepts now, not in specific scientific terms, but in Chinese medicine terms, we have the stomach energy, which relates to the earth element, which relates to the the emotion of worrying and anxiety. Anxiety is a bit more kidneys, but this kind of worrying and pensiveness and overthinking is part of the stomach energy. And that also is part of the muscles. And if we know one group of people who like to worry, if we think about all the people who are really worried about their self-perception, their muscles, and they try to fix it by getting bigger muscles, and they like to overthink, it would be people who get into strength training. So when you're putting this kind of thing under stretch, you're beginning to put a confrontation against the personality typing, I suppose. No, we're speaking completely abstract here, but I think it's interesting to confirm.
I mean, that makes sense. I mean, even if you go along the lines of a lot of the personality and psych typing that Poliquin used and guys like Christian Thibodeau use and stuff, it's like you tend to gravitate towards a physical activity that tends to bias or favor whatever your personality kind of trait is, right? And strength training and flexibility training are, I mean, in my opinion, to this point, they're so romantically integrated with one another, but still they tend to be seen on two ends of the spectrum, right? So it is against, especially as a strength athlete or someone who's more biased towards that, it is a confrontation to something that's probably totally against what you as an individual would, I mean, obviously gravitate towards. That's why you're a strength athlete, not a yogi or or whatever. So it is interesting because obviously they've used that for, I'm more of a long distance and endurance athlete versus a power athlete. Like there are certain personality types that go with certain activities. So it's, I mean, 100%, I think people can relate to that.
Yeah. It's just one of these things. It's just interesting to consider, or more that I was like, oh, they kind of noticed this stuff a while ago and they translated it into their own kind of mytho-poetic language. Whereas we kind of have our more precise terms, I suppose, but it's still interesting to get a bit of insight. But where was I going to go with that? So it's interesting that we have almost two dialectically opposed kind of things. We have people who like contracting, we have people who like releasing. And for one side and the other, they obviously need a bit of balance. We always need a bit of balance in our training in certain ways. But it is kind of like, this kind of static stretching is kind of in complete contrast, and it does different things to the dynamic stretching. If we think of the dynamic loaded range of motion development exercises,
that's the sexy stuff.
It's the sexy stuff, and it definitely works.
Yeah.
But at the same time, like, I've never had someone have a past life experience doing like get-ups for side splits or horse stance squats or Taylor's pose lifts. But I've had people do them in a static Taylor pose, or this is the kind of thing. It's like, there's a lot of stuff in there, and a lot of this tension that we're exposing you to and draining out of the body with static stretching is inhibitory towards your actual potential. And this is what I suppose is possibly, if we're looking at athletics and performance, if we think about, like, this is one of the things people kind of forget. Rate of contraction is biased by rate of relaxation. And if your body is used to operating with lower tension, you will be able to move and perform your task smoother and faster. And this comes down to most athletics. How do we want it? Smooth and fast.
Yeah.
We don't want to be fighting ourselves. It's like the kind of the classic study where, like, we followed people at mid-range of a 100-meter sprint, and we were able to predict their times based on past times and how much tension they were holding in their face. It's like, oh, well, this way, there's all these tensions in the body from various kind of things. And static stretching is one of the best ways to get them out of the body.
Yeah. Kit talks about that a lot too. And also the comparison of like the dog versus the big cat, right? Like how the big cat movement is smooth and rapid and powerful because they spend so much time relaxed and they use that energy when and where exactly at the precise moment that they need it, and no more and no less. And it's like, whereas dogs are constantly just like, on edge and seeking approval. And, that's like one of the best stories. I think the comparisons that he's ever made to the experiences. And then I look at, wow, that's like such a fascinating correlation that he makes between that. And I always like cat-like therapy, like it's like for grandmas who like are into cats. And then when he explains the big cat thing, I was like, oh shit, that's next level. And it's, and people don't realize that big cats pound for pound are like some of the most powerful, strongest animals. And I mean, I sometimes I feel like I could take an 80-pound dog before I can take a 20-pound cat.
I don't know. I had a cat that was about 20 pounds that I think you'd have no problem taking. but like she was kind
So
of
the
fat and
cloth
fluffy.
coming out, man.
But like she could still, like, we had in the house we were in at the time, we still had garden walls that were 14 foot, and she could jump up them. Like even at age, like the cat lived till she was 21, she could still go up them at 20.
Yeah.
Just boom up the wall, God, like jump. She was clearing about, like, I looked at it and I measured it. She was clearing 8 foot in a jump, and then kind of doing a second jump by grabbing her claws on, and then up. And like, yeah, I could get up on the wall. I could not get up as fast as that cat at 20,
Yeah.
which is basically 80 or 140 in cat years or some shit like this.
Yeah. I think that one of the things we should kind of brush on, I think that will help people, even because I know I'm getting a lot of people that are coming from kind of a different spectrum. I know combined our audience tends to kind of already believe in this stuff. Like, that's why they follow us. But for the ones who don't, I think it's important to draw some context behind static stretching, because I don't think people give enough context. Like, there's kind of two ways. You kind of brushed on it in the beginning, where you talked about how the context of a lot of these studies is so bad, which
Yeah.
I tell people all the time already. Like, if you actually read the study and know what you're talking about, you read that and you go, wow, like anyone who actually read this would understand that this is a horrible example and this is horribly applied context. And then never would I apply a 10-minute hamstring stretch directly before a 20-meter sprint. Like, that's just stupid. But they don't think about these things. And, you know, one thing maybe, Emmet, you could probably touch on a lot more in depth is like, why, and this is kind of the argument, and it's funny, Lucas and I make this, is if it was just, if just loading up a certain range more and more wasn't enough, why is it people can't access that? Like, for example, why is it people for years chase squat mobility?
Yeah.
And these things, if the answer is simple as load it up more and go deeper, like, and that's the argument that you see. Oh, all you need to do is put more weight on the range and go deeper. And it's like, well, if that was the case, everyone should be able to technically do that. But it's a lot of times I see the opposite. The more you start to load it, the more you start to actually sacrifice range of motion and things like this. It doesn't go the way that people explain it. And so, I have my own experiences with it, but maybe you can kind of start as to why is that? And this is like, obviously where static stretching becomes a massive tool, but
Foundation.
Yeah, I think it goes all the way back into this idea of releasing into the structure, and that if you're maintaining the contraction, you can basically, if I'm thinking about muscle anatomy here, and now I'm open to being wrong on this, if you think of the architecture and the fibers, they can only stretch so far, and they will still keep contracting. And this is what I think is going on, is like, we actually get this in some of the loaded type of stretching where people lock their side split or their front split to a certain range and they can't go beyond it. Why? Because the body's got used to producing a lot of force here and doesn't want to, because it's like, we go down. We want to pause at this point because this is our normal expected turnaround point. We get very, very good at it. Like, it's like a friend of mine, it's Kieran from Everfit Strength in Dublin. Everfit? I can't remember. Maybe it's Everfit. Anyway, he's a very good powerlifting coach, but he has a joke that powerlifting is the cure for hypermobility. And he was into martial arts when he was a kid. He was super flexible, high kicks, splits, all this. And he got into powerlifting. He's very good at it, and he's very, very good at coaching and stuff like this. But he's just like lost all his flexibility from powerlifting, because he's like, basically his goal with his squat now is to squat half an inch below parallel and no more. And he just wants to get 2 white lights, not 3.
Just enough.
It is this kind of idea of like, if you need a certain amount of duration in a stretch position, either in a dynamic one where you're going into a range. If you think of a kind of graph, it goes down, and then most people turn around. At the turnaround point, if you're turning around quickly, and quick is anything less than 2 seconds for me, you're just basically stretching everything. I remember Louis Simmons talking about, like, in a trained lifter, the stretch reflex can even last up to 5 to 10 seconds. So the stretch reflex, the ability for the body to restore to its starting position, is already active for quite a long time and can be trained to last longer. So you're basically training the stretch reflex, so the restoration reflex for me, to restore you out of that position. Whereas if you start holding it longer, then it starts, oh, wait, now we're getting into time of attention. How much time of attention do we need in a zone? And then it's like, well, could we fix this with static stretching? Is the position too complicated? This is the other thing. A lot of big multi-jointed movements where you're actually stabilizing the body in space, they're too complex to actually release in. This is why using floor, using supports, getting really into it is very useful on static stretching, because you can just release, get heavy and sink. But you can't really do that. Like say the classic one, split squats for stretching out the hip flexors. It can be pretty effective for some people. It's not great, but it works. We can't deny that. But
Initially, I think.
Yeah.
Since I've had so much experience, like you said earlier, like for total beginners who have never experienced that exercise or stretching their hip flexors ever before, for sure you can see progress, without a doubt.
Yeah.
Where I saw people hit a plateau and where my expertise came in specifically for improving the hip flexor range of motion for that movement to get people past like a 6-inch box, you had to spend time stretching your hip flexors.
Yeah.
Like certain people were beating their head against a wall trying to get people deeper without understanding all it took is some static stretching for the hip flexors. And then that they like within weeks, you saw people 4 inches, 3 inches on the floor, whatever. But
yeah,
there's definitely to a point for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. This again comes into context, and when do you introduce certain techniques like this? Like this is the kind of thing. It's like with strength training. Oh, if we just look at say basic block periodization, you know, it's not really what I do, but it's still. Oh, we build some muscle, then we train that muscle to contract faster and stronger. Okay, now that we have some muscle and some strength, we're going to try and maximize the speed it can contract that. So we have our hypertrophy, strength, plyometric, basically. And you don't really go, oh, let's just do plyometrics, hypertrophy, strength, blah. We kind of figured out that there is a sequencing and an introduction to these things. So it's like, oh, someone's never really moved through full range, whatever we're defining that as, or full range of what they're capable of. We'll give them some exercises where they're like, oh, we're going to get you into full range. We're going to get you into full range. We're going to put you into some very more stretched out positions than you used to training. That gives results. We see improvement of range of motion. That stops giving results at a certain time, or a new stimulus is needed. Oh, we can introduce a new stimulus.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of context. Whereas like, you know, you could argue, oh, we had one group stretch and we had one group do long lunges or whatever, and the lunge group got stronger at lunges. That's great. And they got more, they had the same flexibility. Okay, that's great. But eventually one of them is going to stop working on both groups.
Yeah, and I mean, you're only limited to that stretch reflex. If your stretch reflex cuts off short and you're loading and loading and loading, and that's when the practice becomes unsafe.
Yeah.
And I think that point too that Emmet made about the getting strong at that point where you need to actually start to access more ranges. Dan's actually talked about that a lot, and why, like weighted strength training and extended ranges can definitely help, but there's going to get a point where you're going to get so good at creating tension at that range where it's going to be counterintuitive to what you want to do if your goal is to actually go deeper, you know, and that weight and that strength will stop you and inhibit you from going deeper. I think context is so important. Everyone's trying to sell this like global idea that there's this one simple effective tool that's globally works for every single individual in every single scenario. And it's just like, it's okay. Like, it's just so bad.
Yeah. This is the kind of thing, it's always what you come up against in the fitness industry. It's very easy to try and sell something as the one-off solution to your problems. And it's, you know, it's for everything really. It's like, your drain is unblocked. Use this drain unblocker, you know. Whereas,
it's,
you know,
it's the same thing that bad coaches use flexibility for. It's like, and I get these people a lot, like, oh, my such and such is tight or whatever. Give me a stretch for it. And it's like, it's not that easy. It's like, that's not how you use stretching, dude. Like, you know what I mean? Like, but that's because that's like a lot of context that people apply it in, or they said that that's the only way it's applied. And it's like, you know, oh, you have knee pain, like stretch your quads. Well, not necessarily. I mean, like, can it definitely be a useful tool? Sure. But like just stretching your quads for 5 minutes every day doesn't, like, there's what, like, who, you know what I mean? But that's what happens. And it's like, again, it comes down to who's applying it or who's assessing the problem in the first place. And do they have the qualifications to be assessing those problems? Two, if we've gotten past that stage, the tools to address whatever problem it is does it match the assessment? And is there like a logical reason why it was applied, or was it just pulled out of thin air and given to you because they actually have no idea? And I think that's a lot of times how stretching is used. It's like
Yeah.
something sore, like people get a weird reaction. Like, what do you mean? I need to make sure there's like, it's tight. Shouldn't I stretch it? Like,
Yeah.
it depends. Like
Definitely depends.
it depends. It's, but again, that's, well, such and such gave me this quad stretch for 5 minutes every single day. And it's like, holy crap, why were you stretching your quads for 5 minutes every single day? But anyways, yeah,
that's kind of one of those things that's quite interesting. I think I want to talk a bit about injuries and injury prevention with stretching and stuff like this a bit later. But sorry, where's my train of thought? It's like, yeah, something is tight. Something gives you a sensation of tightness. It doesn't necessarily mean you're lacking range of motion or you have tension. You always have to look at the context that the tension appears and what kind of movements. Like, oh, my hamstrings are tight. Well, when did they feel tight? They feel tight when I'm running. Well, that's a very different tightness than like I do a forward fold and they feel tight. One side feels tighter than the other. Very fucking different context and very misapplied. It's like, oh, my calves are so tight. And it's like, well, why is that? Oh, when I'm playing soccer, my calves just feel tight. And it's like, well, maybe it's because you're up on the balls of your feet for like 90 minutes, There's a very different thing. Maybe your calves are tight, but it's just using tight and equating tight to must be stretched is one of the cardinal sins of stretching.
Yeah.
Well, it's like, even when you access an in range, right, Lucas, it's like, wow, my adductors feel tight when my legs are fucking abducted 180 degrees away from my body. But does it actually mean you have tight adducers? Like,
No, exactly.
Like, no, you know what I mean? Like,
yeah. And that's, like how can you release tension? Like, where you're carrying it? Well, what's going on around that? Like, what's going on with the hips there? Like, what if we did some hip work? Oh, okay. Well, actually, now my quad is releasing tension. Like, like it's the bigger picture. It's that isolated train of thought. Like, one of the things I'll say to like a lot of the students too is, someone tells you they want to touch their toes and all you prescribe is like toe touching movements and exercises and flexibility. That's the same as telling someone who asked you to lose the jiggle in their arm. That's the same as prescribing them with arm
bicep extensions.
Yeah. You know what I mean? Like, it's the big,
those bingo wings, bro.
It's the big system. Yeah.
Just get really big muscles to fill it all out. You'll be fine.
It's kind of, that I feel tight thing. I have a band. I call it the Morgan effect, named after one of my students, Morgan, who's very flexible, very talented.
Oh, Morgan Lee.
Yeah, Morgan Lee.
Oh, I'll call him out.
Yeah, call him out. Morgan, we're talking about you. But
such a beast.
He was like, he got flexible super fast. He started off like unflexible and got flexible super fast, and he'd come in every morning, like whenever we were training, whenever he was visiting me and other times, and he'd basically just like 9 o'clock in the morning, no coffee or anything, straight into a flat middle split or over split or whatever he was doing, just boom, flat. And then like the thing out of his mouth would be like, oh, I'm so tight. And I'm just like, you're in an oversplit. You're banned from saying that word. Yes, I know you perceive yourself as tight, but objectively, it's just like you're literally you're at your end range of motion. You will always feel tight at your end range of motion. If you don't, you're not at your end range. That's okay. But this is the mistake people make. Like, that's when we need to stretch you to increase your range of motion in some way or do something that will do it. But when you're like, oh, my hamstrings are tight and my left one feels really tight when I'm standing up, that is generally not a stretching problem. My shoulder feels really tight when I like have it in a push-up position. That's probably not a stretching issue. By equating tightness and solution, once again, with stretching is like, it's basically, as I said, it's like my arms are jiggling, or, I can't see my six pack. I better go do 1 million crunches.
Here's a good example. I'll go back to the head to toe. I was experiencing my left side being tighter than my right for a long time.
Yeah.
And I think finally your recommendation was, stretch your left piriformis, like your left hip. Maybe you need some more rotation in that hip, and it's not getting enough internal rotation, so it's yanking. And sure enough, you know what? Actually, I think this was when I hit my left side. Like, I think I had my right side head to toe.
Yeah.
Probably a week or so before. And you're like, just try stretching your piriformis, your hips out. And so I did that before I did the head to toe routine, and that same time, that's when I hit it on the left, and the range was the same. Like the range was there, definitely in the hamstring and the calves. If something else was limiting it in QL, piriformis, whatever. It wasn't my hamstring. I definitely felt it there for what because of whatever tightness elsewhere, but it definitely wasn't an isolated incident. And more times than not, it's certainly that scenario. Like a lot of course we all have like imbalances and asymmetries, but I don't think a lot of times it comes down to like really a tension issue, more or less. Like it's like from a local standpoint, it definitely, the whole chain, obviously we know, can affect different aspects. I mean, but maybe you chew gum on one side of your mouth, so one's jaw's tighter, so it, if that'll flash or whatever. There's like so many random little things that you can just like pick up on that are, maybe you got punched in the right side of your face, so the whole right side of your face is like more tense. Like there's just like so many examples you could give that could have an impact, that more times than not I find it to be the issues elsewhere.
Yeah, it's definitely like when it's there's a tension issue that's not going away. Yeah, you can always, like, thinking back of one the strangest ones I ever had was I was having ongoing shoulder problems for a while. It was like 2-3 months of kind of not bad, but like one of these niggles where you're just like, I just don't want to train fully because I feel like I'm going to blow something, and that kind of, it was just going on, and I couldn't figure it out. Went to a couple of friends who are good physios. They were like, testing strength, everything was fine, and then I can't even remember how I figured it out, but just my index finger was tight on that side, and I just noticed, oh, that's really tight, and that's limiting my warming up for handstands. So I stretched the shit out of it, but just gave it like a 90-second static stretch of just the index finger, just kind of bending it back and tractioning it. And then lo and behold, it was like a light switch going off in the shoulder, just gone. Like whatever issue was just gone, like literally just turned off. It's like, oh, this is how weird the body can be in giving you a perception. Whereas if I was like going, oh, my shoulder's really tense and holding tension for some reason, I should stretch the shit out of it, do German hangs, stretch my pecs and all this, which admittedly I did try at first just to see if that was kind of something lacking or some other thing. But it just didn't go away. And it was just with me for a while. And then it was like, stretch your finger. Oh, your shoulder pain's gone.
Yeah.
So that actually gets us nicely to one of the things I want to talk about, and what hopefully we can fucking destroy a little, is stretching for injury prevention. It's one of those things, it's just like where you see it's like, oh, stretching doesn't fix injuries or it doesn't prevent injuries, and we use stretching to prevent injuries, and then it doesn't prevent injuries, and all these other kind of, basically the injury topic more so than anything else. And it's kind of, you guys have probably encountered this more because you deal with more sort of track and running and speed power athletes than I do. And it's like, you get this kind of thing where like people say, oh, stretching, it's useless for preventing injuries, so we removed it from our program. And it's like, if you're trying to prevent injuries with stretching, you're about 40 years behind the research, or possibly even 50. With this kind of thing, it's like, we know stretching doesn't thing. What fixes injuries, or what reduces them massively, is strength training. We've known this from the 70s when they started like mass testing strength training for this. We know it compared to stretching. It's like this kind of thing, but then it's like, oh, it's not good for fixing injuries, so then it's useless for everything else. It's kind of throwing the baby out of the bathwater.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I mean, I think too, the other thing is we're all knowledgeable enough that we're not just like stretching and stretching and stretching and that's it, right? Like, it's always a combined modality. Like there's always going to be some, like, like I say obviously because the three of us are talking and we all go, oh, obviously, but to most people it may not be so obvious, but like, stretch your hamstrings, strengthen your quads and your hip flexors, and also strengthen your hamstrings isometrically, or like, it's not like that's also one of the contexts that it's given in. Whereas it's like this group did only stretching and this group did, only strength training.
Yeah.
And group A or group B did only strength training, got faster, and group A that did only stretching didn't get faster. And so, there's no benefit to stretching for sports performance. that's like one example, right? Like
Yeah.
only strength training, don't stretch or whatever. And it's like, you go, okay, but like kind of the first thing we have to define is performance and like what that means to the individual. What is the task that they have to accomplish, which is going to basically define what the standard of performance is going to give us. And like, is stretching going to necessarily directly make you faster? Like, is that the stimulus that it's, I don't think there's any like correlative evidence that suggests that stretching absolutely makes you faster. I don't think anyone's claiming that. Now, does it come with certain qualities that might allow somebody to be faster at certain times? For sure. I can give a story. There was a specific NFL athlete who training a certain system, a very successful one. He rehabbed him from an Achilles blowout. He ended up playing in the league for like 8 years. But he didn't really have stretching until I got involved. And he went and ran. I think his last few years, he was kind of trying out for teams, and he played every year and made different teams. But I think he was going to try out for like Arizona Cardinals, or, I could be wrong about whatever team it was. But the point is that the only thing he changed specifically this season was flexibility work. He started stretching. He had stretching routines that I had given him, a lot of static passive, whatever, flexibility routines. And I remember when he came back from the tryout, ended up making the team, got an offer, extended his career, and what stood out to him, obviously enough to tell me, was that, dude, the only thing that I changed this year was an hour before I went out to run my 40 for testing, I stayed in my hotel room and then I stretched for an hour. And not directly. It's not like he stretched for an hour and then boom, went straight and ran. Like he probably had an hour window between finishing his flexibility and getting to the field and then warming up and then whatever and then running. He ran his fastest 40 that year that he ever ran his whole entire career. The only training stimulus that changed was adding flexibility to his routine. Yeah. Why did it work? Maybe he gets nervous before he runs. Yeah. Maybe he gets the butterflies and gets all jittery, and so he underperforms. And maybe the flexibility just helped him relax. Maybe it just helped him chill out. Maybe it just helped him get out of his head and just be there and be able to run and do well. And in that argument, you could maybe say, yeah, well, stretching flexibility definitely, absolutely had some contribution to improving his level of performance. You can't tell me it doesn't. You certainly can't tell him it didn't, because that's a massive contribution that he put together himself. It's not like I was like, did the stretching help? Did the stretch? No, it was like totally unsolicited. Like, dude, the stretching, I feel great, blah, 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 blah. And there's a lot of other scenarios I can give, but it's like, to say that it's totally irrelevant to athletes because it doesn't have an exact stimulus that directly improves it, like that we can measure, doesn't mean it didn't help do that. Yeah. And it's like kind of stretching and bodybuilding too. Like, obviously we know a little bit about stretch-induced hypertrophy now, but ago there were guys stretching that. Frank Zane, guys like this, like stretching their lats between sets because they knew that getting more range of motion through their lats is what contributed to, a greater muscle fiber recruitment, blah, 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 whatever. And of course, did they really know that then? Like, was there any science or literature or research or anything that says, yeah, for sure, like stretch-induced hypertrophy and stretching between sets makes tons of sense? Because no, but, for them it worked. I mean, Dante Trudell, and there's a lot of guys in bodybuilding and stuff that knew that. And, and even Poliquin knew that when he made the antagonist supersets more popular. The traditional style of training was you just did the same exercises 3 times in a row before moving on. But one thing that Poliquin, whether he learned it from somebody else or whatever, I don't know enough about it, but he definitely made like you do a push followed by a pull. They're superset with one another. Why? Because the pulling following the pushing fatigues and relaxed the lats, which allowed you to get more, activation of the pecs or the shoulders. Like, so stretching definitely works in many different scenarios. It's just, how do you apply it? In what context is it applied, and why? What outcome are you trying to get with it, more or less? Are you trying to get the splits? Okay. Yeah. You're going to need a stretch. Are you trying to run a a marathon. Okay, maybe you don't need to stretch. Like, so I'm not just going to go, oh, stretch. You know, maybe we do find that one hamstring is actually tighter and you're slightly rotated and you're more dominant on one side and blah, blah, blah. So then we use flexibility, but I'm never going to say like, oh, it makes you a faster marathon runner. But I'm also not going to say it doesn't contribute to some degree, more or less, in your ability to perform better, whether there's some sort of like physical, measurable quality that we can look at, or even if it's a more of an emotional, psychological quality that just impacts how your mind works or whatever that, you know, we can contribute. You know, that's going to be a little bit more of a subjective experience, but you know, I think it's up to the individual to determine that for themselves. Like, it's not really my place. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
it's definitely yeah, I'm just trying to think on this one. There's definitely a few things to unpack here. It's like, oh, have you tried it? Actually, the hypertrophy is quite an interesting one to come back to as well with static positioning. It's kind of that's kind of an interesting one just to think about in terms of this. It's like, oh, we know that we can, well, from the bird, like John Perillo, if people remember this kind of person who was the inspiration behind Dante Trudeau, it was like there was these birdwing studies showing immense hypertrophy from being in big ass long stretches for quite a long time. And then they're obviously trying to replicate this in bodybuilding because anything that will make you bigger is good. But one of the interesting things is what the stretching induced hypertrophy does is it induces hypertrophy at the distal ends of the muscles. So normal concentric training basically makes the middle of the muscle bigger, for it's the simplified, right. Whereas this makes the ends and the tendons and the collagen thicker. And, you know, maybe that would be very advantageous if you're in a sport where you need to use your tendons and get stronger, or not be at risk of injury. You know, and as I was saying, like I've just come from saying stretching doesn't prevent injury, but I'm saying there is possibly some mechanisms here that are unexplored in terms of the thing. So it is it's one of these things like I do, you know, I look at, say, rhythmic gymnastics, where they're not as powerful generally, but they are generally the athletes are displaying the greatest range of motion. A lot of them aren't that injured, even though they're doing some fucking crazy shit. And they're also the people who probably stretch statically the most. In fact, most of your rhythmic class is static stretching, bar obviously. Well, the rhythmic class is a very long class. Like if it's a proper class, it's probably about 3 or 4 hours long. So there's a lot of stuff, but like a lot of their development is like, yes, they have conditioning. Yes, they do a lot of ankle and knee and hip stability work. They don't really do a lot of hypertrophy or weight training or kind of normal conditioning, but it's all conditioning in context of the sport. But they do a hell of a lot of static stretching, either bridges, splits, suspended splits, all this kind of stuff. Partner stretching, static partner stretching, lots of stuff. But they're just not that injured in general. You know, particularly when you see the people who are doing it, particularly once they've survived past teen zones, they're all quite like, they don't have a lot of muscle. They're not that strong. They're strong in context of flexibility, and they're much stronger than that. But in terms of like raw brute strength that we'd equate with injury risk, they're not yet. They're not that injured. And that's one of these things you have to begin to look at. It's like, what is the long-term effect of this? How does it get implemented? Can we hypertrophy our muscles all over to make them stronger and their connections to everything? It is kind of, you know, it's just something to consider, I suppose, more so than anything else.
Yeah, but the approach to that is where all the in between markers are missing, and they're not being presented in a way that allows people to know their starting points. Like, you're not going to start with a Jefferson curl and load the bar up and just blast yourself into this range and then get to that range and be
Why
there.
not?
You know,
Band assisted Jefferson curls to get you down faster.
Why not? I thought you could do that. Oh,
yeah. So again, it does come around to like the sexy stuff, right? Like everyone gets really distracted by this sexy stuff. It looks cool. It's a barbell. Or, it's, I don't have to stretch. I'm moving. And I mean, do whatever makes you happy. Like, do whatever makes you happy for sure. But if you're objectively saying doing this is going to, give me this flexibility that I'm looking for. It's like, no, it's not. It's not going to give you that. Might make you feel.
This is
good.
not the flexibility you're looking for.
I like it. Yeah, it's kind of.
We had to do the Star Wars reference since I'm in the Millennium Falcon and Emperor Emmet is over there residing over his Darth Sith minions.
I think Lucas, with your drug rug, we need you on like Endor with the Ewoks.
Yeah, exactly. It does look like that. It does look like that. Oh my gosh.
Ewok.
Quick segue. Quick nerdy segue. Oh my god, that's hilarious.
Shit, there's some point there I wanted to.
Chewie.
Was that an important one or not? No, probably wasn't important to. Come back to me.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter. I've forgotten my point or train of thought.
So the context of how we're going to, get to those points, comes back around to the setting that foundation with static stretching, establishing those end ranges in a way where it's measurable and allows you to like move yourself towards these concepts of end range strengthening and like set the stage for it to at least get to the point where you're not just turning in circles. Like that's really where everyone ends up going, is they're just walking in circles. Like, oh, I tried this and I tried that and this isn't working. I tried this and I tried that. This isn't working. It's like, okay, it is still going back to, have you done that work at the start? Yeah. That's going to actually lay that foundation for you to get there.
A lot of people are just toe dippers too. Mm-hmm. I mean, let's just be realistic. Let's be honest, and let's just call everyone out. Like, you haven't done it long enough to really know if it works. You were on this system for 3 weeks. You're on this system for 3 weeks. You're on this system for 3 weeks. It's like, it's like, of course you haven't done it long enough to know if it's going to work. Like, and it's funny because a lot of people get in my programming and they're like, holy crap, like I come from having 24 leg exercises to having 2. And it's like, why do you have so many little exercises? And I was like, well, a couple reasons. One, I have clinical experience working with people that are like, come from extreme states of like, dysfunction, if that's what you want to call it. I don't want to title people as that, but, and it's like making a soup, right? Yeah. It's like when you make a soup, you add one ingredient, you taste it.
Yeah.
Okay, great. You add another ingredient, you taste it. Okay, yeah, this is going to need a little bit of this. And you just that's how you build a soup, right? It takes like 8 hours, 9 hours. My mom used to get up like 5 a.m. to start making soups sometimes for dinner.
You didn't just get the one in the can?
No, she was country, like everything was made from scratch, real deal. But you don't just take all the fucking ingredients and just dump the shit into the pot and go, here's soup. And then, and like wish and hope for the best at the end. It's, how do we know what works? If we're doing 24 different things, it's like you have no way to know, even just with some sort of subjective core evidence that anything that you're doing works. You're not going to know. There's just too many variables. There's too many factors here to go, oh, this definitely worked or this definitely worked. It's just like, something worked. And now, like, how are you going to know what it was? And so I think that's like a big thing that people kind of get shocked when they come, is like, I'm so used to doing all these different things. Mm-hmm. Why is it I don't have all these different things in what I'm doing now? It's like, because if something happens to you, I have no way of knowing what caused it. Mm-hmm. If something worked, is successful for you, I have, other than my own experiences and the reason I gave it to you in the first place or whatever, but it's like, if something does come up, or if there was some major breakthrough, I want to be able to attribute it to something that was done. And the less I have to pull from, it's going to be a little easier to determine what that was than what it wasn't. You know what I mean? Which I think is like kind of an interesting, like that was, even with your flexibility programming, was such a different experience from so many other people's, because a lot of other people was just like so much shit. It was overwhelming. Yeah. And then when it was like Emmett's flexibility programming was like way more minimalistic. But then it was like, wow, this actually works, because you have a very small amount of things that you are doing that you can definitely go, this work, versus like, I don't really know what worked, but I'm just going to kind of keep doing all this stuff because something in here worked, but I can't really pinpoint it. Right.
Yeah. It's
you put your
kind of
in the right spot.
Yeah. It's basically like, it is, if we just look at things, I always think about flexibility at the very initial stage as a skill. there's a skill to being flexible. There's a skill to doing these positions. There's a skill to doing the positions, getting good at them, and then having it transfer to whatever you hope it will transfer. So there is, just like we have a transfer of strength, like, oh, we want to, speaking to strength coaches, oh, we want to get this athlete faster on the field. Oh, we'll get them stronger. It doesn't necessarily make them faster. You still have to teach them how to access that strength in, in context of what's going on the pitch. It's the same with flexibility. Yeah. It's like, oh, there's a skill of doing the exercise. You do the exercise well, it improves. It doesn't necessarily improve everything else. And you're trying to get this skill first in the exercise, and then you transfer it over and hopefully begin to see it. And this is what I look for in a lot of the training I'm doing is, when do I start seeing the emergence, as I would title it in my system, when do I see the emergence of the range of motion from the exercise to something else that involves that same range of motion but isn't trained directly? So it's like, then it's like, oh, cool. So I know this person, you have someone tight, it's like they will gain 20 degrees in their split over 12 weeks or something like this. Then in 3 to 8 weeks later, I should see an increase in their straddle handstand. If I don't see the increase in the straddle handstand, then I have, okay, maybe I need to train this thing specifically to get the person out. Is it a cueing idea that there's range there, but they don't expect to use it? Perception basis of like, oh, the body's used to doing this. That's one type of cueing. Is it like they can't do it and there's a strength deficit in one of their planes of movement? Okay, then we train strength. Whereas if I was just to go like, oh, let's cue, give you strength, everything, then it's the kitchen sink approach. Whereas we can be a bit more precise with a lot of what we do.
Mm-hmm.
What's needed for that person.
Yeah.
12 weeks is not a long time.
No,
put things in the
scheme of things. No,
I think it's a fair amount of time to give something a shot, but anyone listening here that thinks 12 weeks is a long time, it's not.
Yeah, I mean, no one in the right mind is going to do a bodybuilding program and expect like 3 weeks later they're going to be like jacked. You know what I mean? I mean, I would at least
be jacked in 28 days.
I mean, at least I hope not.
12 weeks is enough time to actually evaluate if you're moving in the right direction. Like,
for sure.
Are you moving in the right direction?
I mean, people just fail to recognize that there's certain biological principles and adaptations that you just by nature's design have to give time to show its head. Like you can't, there's nothing you can do to speed that up. Like maybe, there's just not, otherwise we'd all be like hacking into our own biology and becoming super mutants and whatever. Like there's just a certain design that you have to respect and understand what those are. There's no shortcut.
There is.
12 weeks gives you 12 weeks is almost, even for the coach's point of view too, gives you a decent amount of frame of time to know if that person is committed. Are you actually can you
are you wasting my time or not?
Can you focus on this for 12 weeks? Can you just do this for 12 weeks without second guessing it? Because that's your barrier right there. It's like every time you start something, you change it because it's not happening right away. It's like, or you're not giving it time to evaluate it and then troubleshoot, figure out what needs to happen. That's where you do have to have that constant reminder of how long it's going to take. Like 1 to 3 months, a beginner has never actually stretched before. I feel like $1 million. It's like, he's never done this before, and you've never done it the right way. And then that's where shit kind of hits the fan. And it's like, well, I'm not progressing the way I want to, or I'm not dunking a ball, or, doing these things. It's like
my favorite. Oh, I have never trained my knees before, and now I'm training my knees, and my knees feel great. It's like,
it's,
no shit.
Those beginner adaptations.
Wow.
12 weeks is not a long time.
No.
I think that it comes down to it. It's like what I'm always kind of hunting for is the plateaus, because the plateaus is like we're always going to get cheap neurological gains. These are cheap. These are the ones like, I've just never done this before. I've never thrown a dart at a dartboard, and I'm going to spend 12 weeks throwing darts at a dartboard. Oh wait, I've gotten better throwing darts at a dartboard. Boom, mind blown. But then I'll reach a point where like, oh, actually my dartboard skills aren't improving. There has to be something I need to look at. Oh, is it my stance? Is it the way I'm holding it in my eye? Am I holding it different? Is my grip right? All these, I don't even play darts, so I don't even know why I'm pulling this up as a thing. But you get the idea what I'm going at. But what we're looking at is like
dart expert.
Yeah, particularly with like say strength training and other stuff. It's like, oh, I changed onto a new program, or I changed a new flexibility program. Oh, I'm going deeper each week. I'm going deeper each week. And then it stops working. When it stops working, that's when you need to persist. As long as the program is logical and other stuff, because that's when like you've reached the limit of what you got out of the system on the coordinative aspects of the nervous system, coordinating your skill to the exercise to your thing. And then it's like, okay, well, now the body has to adapt because you've reached the stimulus threshold. And that's where things get interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Infinite adaptation, though, is possible. 2.5 kg a week.
Oh, God. I think kind of one of the last things I know, I definitely wanted to get into this conversation because this is like the argument that's usually brought up to me. And it's funny. And I got into a spat with a doctor on Lane Norton's post about how stretching flexibility is a waste of time for people who want to improve performance. But anyways, basically the post was like, here's the argument thrown in your face, right? And this is where you know people are stupid. Yeah. Is he goes, I made the argument of like, okay, objectively, if stretching doesn't make you more flexible, or if stretching decreases force output, makes you less explosive, etc., why is it that martial artists, taekwondo athletes can jump and kick something 9 feet in the air? Let me see you kick something 9 feet in the air, Lane Norton, and tell me that, that's like, what? Or some of these jumps that ballerinas make, right? Like these crazy 360 leaps where their toes are literally like 4 feet off the ground. Yeah. And they go, here's the argument that gets thrown back goes, well, the Australian ballet stopped stretching and they saw a significant increase or decrease in injuries over a period of time. And you go, and okay, show me this link. And so they send you a link of an article that was written by a newspaper in Australia that says Australia's ballet, making waves and changing the industry because they stopped static stretching and start introducing strength training in their athletes. Injuries go down. And there's a couple factors you go, okay, one, I can tell you right now from knowing ballerinas and knowing ballet, these girls did not stop stretching. For one, they're still stretching. Two, like just that argument alone is like, I know you don't understand it. You've never been to a ballet. You've probably never seen a ballerina in your life. I don't even know why you're bringing this up because you don't know what you're talking about, but I'll entertain it. And then it goes, and then it's like, well, they did calf raises, and so their ankle injuries went down. And it's like, okay, that's logical. Like they strengthened their ankles and their decreasing ankle injuries. But it goes back to the traditional response of something is hurting, something is whatever, traditionally, and a lot of these athletes don't have somebody standing over them all the time. So their response is to just stretch more. And it's like, these girls are as flexible as you can get. Like you almost can't get more flexible than these girls. Yeah. And it's treating the symptom with stretching and then saying, well, static stretching is useless because these girls are still injured when they static stretch their ankles. And it's like, but that, again, it's not how you use stretching. You don't have an ankle injury and then go, well, let me just stretch it more and more and more and more. And then when you add some calf raises in, you go, wow, this is revolutionary. They're decreasing injuries because it's just like a really misleading article because anyone involved in dance knows that these girls have spent more time stretching that will last them most people's lifetimes. It's like it's not a one or the other scenario. Like, I don't care what article you show me. Like, all you're showing me is that they introduced calf raises. Like, I can promise you those like, if you're an Australian ballerina and you're part of the Australian ballet and you guys stop static stretching, please message me and let me know. But I very seriously doubt that's the case at all. I know a lot of ballerinas, they all stretch. Yeah. The revolutionary thing that's changed, sorry to just finish, the revolutionary thing that's changed in ballet the last 5 years or whatever, and I know this from clients who have daughters and stuff in ballet, is they started introducing some basic body weight strength training in terms of calf raises and tibia work and, lunging and whatever. But they just added some more strength training. Like, but again, it's not like they're still stretching. Like I was just talking to a client the other day whose daughter's, she's in New York for ballet. And it's like, 8 hours of her day. She probably 2 or 3 of those hours every day. She stretches an hour before she leaves the house for a full hour as soon as she wakes up. She gets to the studio. She stretches another hour. Then she warms up for an hour. Then she dances for however many hours. And then later that night, does some more stretching and strength work. It's like, these are full-time athletes. Like, this is what they do for a job. Like it's the same with high-level gymnasts. Yeah. 6 hours of training a day at least. And it's like, a lot of that is stretching, and a lot of that is obviously strength training. And then a lot of that is also the skill application, the dancing or the gymnastics skills or whatever. It's not like they just do calf raises and become good ballerinas. Like,
I think that's kind of like a good example actually of the opposite side of people we normally deal with.
So exactly.
If we look at traditional ballet training, it has a huge demand on flexibility, particularly with the girls. It has to the point where the girls are stretching so young and so much that they will generally actually warp their growth plates and be able to, they're still pliable. Kids and joints are pliable up to a certain point. So you'll find like, it's the classic one, just to talk about this a bit. You'll find like ballerinas have like zero internal rotation and their feet and ankles can't fit. And what's happened is their joint capsules have actually shifted the arc. So what is measuring 0 on a goniometer for internal rotation is actually plus 15 for them. Because they can externally rotate their hips like past 180 degrees. So the arc shifted. So that's how much stretching they've engaged in to change the actual physical bone structure. The other thing is like, we're basically approaching this thing. We have someone who traditionally doesn't do a lot of strength training, does dance preparation and does stretching. And then go, oh wait, we added strength training and it prevented injuries, therefore X is bad. No, it's just like, oh, we have someone who has never stretched before but has done loads of strength training, feels like shit. Oh, we gave them stretching, we gave them well-designed stretching program, they start to feel great again. It's the exact same thing from the other end of the spectrum. And this is what people, once again, context, what has the person done before? The 3 W's. Who am I speaking to? Where are they in relation to what they want to do? And what is their previous history with this skill? It's very fucking simple. It's like, I've never done strength training, I have injuries. And I've tried stretching. Well, it's obviously not working. Let's do strength training. I've done loads of strength training. I still have injuries. Have you tried stretching? No. Let's try it and see. And is there a context for the application of these modalities? Yes. So
that's the question that Kit came to when he did his thesis for back, right? Like, doesn't he tell how he had the one class that was like incredibly strong athletes, pain, injuries, whatever. He had the other class, super flexible, not a lot of strength, tons of injuries, whatever. Obviously it wasn't strength. Obviously it wasn't flexibility. And then he found that it's like, as we most understand now, it was this group needs what this other group needs, and this other group needs what this group doesn't have. And then they start building both qualities and both capacities in both groups. And then you see improvements in those qualities, whether it be pain, injuries, or whatever, dissipate or go down from having both. It's not a one or the other thing. And I think that's what he actually based his whole thesis on when he wrote Overcoming Neck and Back Pain for his PhD. I think that's what he did it on, was just the realization that it's like, it isn't just strength training and it isn't just flexibility. It's like, do they have the range of motion needed and strength in that range of motion to execute whatever task or to, withstand whatever stimulus is being put on their body? Kind of the end of the story. Like, it really is that simple. It's not that complicated.
It comes down to assessing like what you currently are capable of. If you are hypermobile, your program might not even have stretching in it. You can access those positions, and everyone's banging their head on a wall because they're stretching to get flexible and they don't know how to evaluate the success of that. They don't know if that is what they need to be doing. You might not even, you might not need to have to stretch as much. But that is specific to the individual, not the person who doesn't want to stretch.
Right, exactly. Or finding a way not to. 100%. It's like people ask me now, how much do you stretch? And I almost don't give an answer, because then their expectation is that's how much they can do to get my results. And it's like, no. I started this path 7 years ago. I've spent a lot of time in static stretches, and I am now at the point where maintenance of that is relatively easy. It is a lot more cost effective and time efficient for me not to do it because I don't have to focus on it. So it's just like, I'm just not wasting my time doing something I don't need to do, but I put in the hours leading up to this point and we're all in the same boat. It's like, you know, do I have 100% access? No. Could I go right now and within the next week go back, which initially took me 5-6 months to get comfortably? Absolutely. So it's like, you know, can I do more strength training versus stretching now? Is the ratio severely unbalanced? Yeah, of course it is. But it's like, because I've put the time in where it's needed to address the things I needed to address. And for me, for a long time, I'm now reaping the benefits of exploring flexibility and creating some sort of tension symmetry in my body that I can go to the gym and I can do bilateral lifts and train my ass off and squat every day. And I don't get the shit that people get because I put in the work. Yeah. And it's a lot of that was, I absolutely know 100% without a doubt, was flexibility training, real structured, good quality flexibility training when and where needed in the context it needed to be in, not just doing it for the sake of doing it, not just, you know, showing up and being on my phone and just kind of hanging out. No, like legitimate training. Like you're not going to squat with your phone, you know, like stretching and like Emmet said, really focusing on the introversion of like, what am I feeling? What am I experiencing for a full hour? And it's a pretty powerful experience if you can do it. It's, you know, and within relatively short amount of time, you'll notice.
Yeah. Like I stretched my ass off to get to the point where I don't have to stretch my ass off. And
yeah, it's like the gymnast that can come back 10 years later and still do an iron cross. It's like, yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, you spent like your whole childhood developing an iron cross. Like, of course it's still there. You know what I mean? Like it's, you know, to some degree, but you hear those stories all the time, right? It's like, I think you spent time developing a skill.
Yeah. It's this kind of thing. It's like, you know, how much range do you need? Obviously we don't expect everyone to get splits and all this shit, but putting this time in to get the range and the familiarity with it, then it just lasts. This is the kind of thing. It's like, oh, I still just can do all these things. Oh, maybe it gets a small bit tighter from the peak. That's why you always need a small bit more than you think you need. But once you have that, you're just like, oh, I don't stretch. I can still do splits. Like I know so many kind of former acrobats or older acrobats or coaches I've had who are in their 50s and 60s, and they didn't train. Like some of them had gotten pretty big, you know, and they're just like, oh, you know, I'm 60. I fucking don't give a fuck about training. I play with my grandkids. About it is my only activity. Yet I can still do splits and, you know, all this. And it's like, well, it doesn't really fade. And that's the kind of thing. It's like, oh, people are like, oh, it takes away from my training. It's like, you do it once, do it well, spend a focused period of time, and then it's there.
Yeah.
I just remember my point.
Your whole life. A lot of these kids are 20. A lot of these kids are 20 years old. Like, oh, I'm 15. I was told, it's like, dude, stretch till you're 18. You'll never have to stretch again in your entire life. Like the next 60, 70 years of your life, you'll retain, I guarantee you, probably 90 to 95% of that range, unless something extremely traumatic happens to you, like a massive accident or something like that. Like you'll have it literally the rest of your life. That's not a massive investment for a good ROI, I think. I mean,
it's that kind of thing. With strength training, do it once, do it well, get strong, and then you can cruise for a long time. Right. I think I actually have to wrap up here. I'm just getting a bit late. I have to get back to some stuff.
I think it's a good place.
Yeah. The moon's coming down.
I've got to fucking fuck up. Lucas.
He's arrived. He's got to launch and blow up the planet. Yeah.
Awesome, guys.
Got something to do.
Where's my big red button?
Oh man.
All right, you guys got some exit music to put on?
Oh, come on, Emmet. Cue it.
I can't really do the handstand factory, the music, but what have I got? I've got stretch bitches.
Yeah. Awesome.